Okay, Ryan, can you talk a little bit about the aftermath when BLM left and they were headed down the road? What happened here?
Well, number one, we retrieved our cattle from their compound, and we took them back underneath the bridge, back towards the Virgin River, and released them on the Virgin River so that they could recover. The cattle had been treated terribly. They had been run hard. Their feet have been worn down. Their feet were sore from the running. They had been not been watered or fed properly. Many of the calves had been lost from their mothers.
Ryan, tell us more about that. How do cows get sore feet?
Well,
They don't wear Dr. Scholl's.
no, they forgot to put their shoes on.
Yeah.
No, cattle, their feet are much like fingernails that humans have. Horse feet are similar, but they have their feet are like fingernail type material. Now, these hills that we live around is very gravelly, very rough, very coarse, and a cow in her normal day travels back and forth from feed to water and can walk, a certain amount of miles and be all right. But if she travels more than that, then her feet become worn down and the quick begins to show through. And it's like if you cut your fingernail too short and you make it bleed, oh, that hurts. That hurts terrible. And yet cattle's feet will get like this and they become sore-footed, as we say, and they can't walk. They end up tiptoeing around, carefully putting their feet down. And these cattle had been run for so many miles and for so long that, one, they were dehydrated, they were exhausted, they were been sweaty, but their feet had been worn down and they were sore. So by letting them go on the river where there's moisture and there's sand rather than rocks and gravel, give them a time to heal. Because they just simply can't live and survive if they can't travel. If you can't walk to feed and walk to water because your feet are sore, that's a pretty rough life.
So how many of your cattle were missing? How many have you found dead?
Well, from the official counts the BLM made of their gathers to the account that we counted going underneath the bridge, we were short 37 head of cattle. That didn't count the calves that they had lost during the gather. It was right during calving season. We had baby calves. In fact, several of the calves were born right in their pens. One was born the very day, probably just moments before we released them. Probably born right while we were in the battle and negotiations. Okay, we do have that little calf. We named her Liberty, little heifer. But her mother lost her. And so we have her here on the farm along with numerous other calves that lost their mothers. Again, we're talking about the aftermath. We have found several calves out in the hills, out on the range, dead, that had lost their mothers during the roundup. We found several places where they had buried cattle, several places where they had shot cattle and left them lie, and we're still missing. Of that 37 head, we've really only accounted for 7 or 8 of those cattle. So there's still 30 plus cattle missing that we'd have no accountability for. There's been several cattle die since the roundup, since the release, because of the stress that they had caused upon the cattle during the roundup. And so the cattle were in very, very poor condition because of the stress that they had been pressed upon them.
What did the BLM intend to do with your cattle?
They were going to sell them and keep the money to themselves to compensate for the expenses of the roundup. This is a good place to talk about the cost and the expense of the roundup. Now, supposedly, this is what they had told the media had told the world, was that we owed $1 million in fees. Well, and I can go about disputing about that $1 million, but it was interesting because at the beginning of the roundup, they said we owed like $300,000, and then like the next day it jumped to $1 million.
Did they actually send you a bill or anything official
No.
that stated that?
First of all, they have no authority to charge us any money because we don't have a contract with them. But second of all, no, there's been no statement, no bill. They have not billed us. They have not tried to collect from us. The issue of a fee or an amount that we owe to them was never the issue. They didn't want our money. They just simply wanted us off. Now, to prove that fact, I know that they were allocated or budgeted $5.5 million. $5.5 million was allocated to this gathering roundup process.
And how long were they allocating this for?
They were supposed to be here for about 1 month. So in 1 month's time, the federal government was going to spend $5.5 million to gather the cattle off the Bundy Ranch and to decimate us. All of this because we owed them supposedly $1 million. They're going to spend $5.5 million to collect $1 million. Now, anybody with a logical mind can realize that it was not about the money. Who spends $5.5 million to collect one?
Okay, well let's ask. Okay, so we know it's not about the desert tortoises. We know it's not about the cattle. We know it's not about the fees that that you don't owe because you have no contract. What is it about?
Good question. We've heard all kinds of things, that it's about solar power plants, it's about oil exploration, that it's about mineral rights. Quite honestly, or quite frankly, I don't know, I guess it's a big guess, but I just think it's about control. It's just about control, about Agenda 21. They're trying to get the people off the land and gain absolute control over the people. That's it.
Address this. Supposing that you did have a contract with the BLM, how could the fees have been $1 million? I don't think it could, right? If you had a contract, what would the fees what could they have been?
Well, the fees currently, I don't know exactly what they are, but they're about $1.37 per head per month. And so if you add that up, there's no way it would even add up to...
Because they're only getting 12.5%.
Well, and that's the other thing. They're only getting 12.5% of that $1.37. So for us to owe them $1 million, we would have had to been here for, about 100... I don't know how many years. I'd have to do some math to figure it out.
And a whole lot more cattle.
Yeah, and a whole lot more cattle than we had. Such an amount certainly didn't add up in 20 years.
But yet, that incited the public, people to say, well, they owe $1 million. And they just take that lock, stock, and barrel, oh, they owe $1 million.
Yeah, see, and there, like I said, there's no documentation to that. There's no itemization to that. There's no basis for that. Who come up with this $1 million? It was just a figure picked out of thin air by the Bureau of Land Management so that it could go to the media, so that the people would believe that we were freeloaders, that we were negligent in our duties, that we needed to be removed for the public good.
But they never gave you a bill. They never gave you an itemized list of how much you owed.
Never.
Well, we're talking money. I get a little upset when I go to the grocery store at the price of beef. And I also am one of those granolas, so I like grass-fed or range-fed beef. I understand that there's 10 million head of cattle missing off the western rangelands. What has that done to the price of beef?
Well, 10 million, I don't know about the numbers exactly, but I can tell you what's been happening across the country for the past, not just 20 years, but maybe, even 30 or 40 years. I know in the last 10 years, the state of Wyoming says that their cattle production is down by 50%. I know this because we went and met with the cattlemen of Wyoming about a year ago. We were talking about their problems there, and that's what their official numbers were that they were down in production by 50% over the last 10 years. How much they were down from 10 years prior to that, I don't know. Elko County at one time back in the 60s, their claim to fame was that they were the cattle capital of the world. Now there's not enough cattle in Elko County, Nevada to amount to much. And so the state of Nevada is way down. All the western states, their cattle production is way, way, way down. And so to compensate all the cattle production loss, the United States has been importing cattle from South America and from other countries, but primarily South America. And the imports have been huge. America is not producing enough feed to support itself, enough food, enough beef. Now, I understand that South America has got tired of exporting all their beef because their prices were way high because it's all going to America. And so they have put a stop to their exportation, at least to a large degree. Now that has created a supply and demand issue. There's a huge demand for beef right now and the supply is down, and so that has raised the price of beef. Now that's good for the ranchers because for so many years the prices have been so low that we have a hard time making a living, and so it's kind of nice to actually make a little money for a change. But still the fact remains that America's production is down to the point that we cannot produce enough beef for our own people. And yet we have lands that have gone dormant, lands that have gone unused. The Bureau of Land Management is destroying ranches left and right. Ours is not the only one. There's literally hundreds. I mean, there was, 52 other ranchers in this county alone? One little county. And what have they done to other counties? What have they done across this country? They're eliminating beef production. And yes, it's raising price. And yes, the availability of beef is minimal right now.